to episode 274 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 25th of March 2024. I'm Joe, and with me are Graham.
Hello.
Will.
Hello.
And Gary.
Hello.
Gary, you're not Fadim.
No, sorry, we've kicked him out for the day.
Yeah, Fadim's a little under the weather. So Gary from Linux After Dark is joining us. And that means that this is the first episode for a long time that is recorded entirely outside the EU. So we're taking advantage of our Brexit freedoms.
Shit, and I was in Italy yesterday.
So close.
If you like it so much, why don't you go back there?
Okay, I will.
No, wait. Take me with you.
Right, let's do some news then. And Graham, you're probably going to have to go back to Italy while we talk about this one. A few weeks ago on Linux Matters, Popey talked about finding a scam Bitcoin wallet. There's a tautology for you, eh? But this was a genuinely scammy one that just stole all your Bitcoin. And that got removed, and then loads more have appeared, and they slowly get removed. And there was a big kind of kerfuffle about it on the Snapcraft forum. And now they're going to implement a new policy whereby they manually review all new Snap name registrations, which seems like a good idea. It seems a bit hard to scale, potentially, but nevertheless, it needed to happen.
I think slowly is the operative word here. The thread that you link to on the Snapcraft forum talks about it being days between, or at least hours between, something getting reported as being dodgy and it actually getting removed, which just seems like an extremely long time when we're talking about financial thievery that's going on. So it just felt like it wasn't being taken seriously enough.
Is it financial thievery or is it magic beans thievery? It's very hard for me to have sympathy with people who lose crypto, but I suppose I probably ought to have a bit more sympathy, eh?
Well, it's not really about the crypto stealing, is it? It's about the processes that go into checking whether an app is what it says it is. And we've talked about this on the show a lot of times over the years, that, as you say, the scalability of having somebody check something doesn't work, but neither does automatic checking and publishing. I can't see, and I've said this before, but I can't see how you can provide a service that automates the provision of apps to millions of users and review each one without having a workforce of thousands of people explicitly reviewing the apps. It just doesn't seem possible to me.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky one. And I know they're doing the manual review for now, but I can't see how that scales to every single Snap in the store that gets registered from now going forwards. But the interesting thing for me is that these apps were all very similar apps. They were effectively just an Electron wrapper around something, is my understanding. All of the usernames had the same kind of format. So it feels like there's probably some checks and balances that could have been put into place. But I guess at that point it just becomes whack-a-mole, doesn't it? It only takes the scammers to start having a different username or packaging the application slightly differently.
You're saying it's greppable?
I mean, the examples that Popey gave probably were, but I guess it doesn't scale to every single type of malicious app that might be uploaded to the store. But then, like you say, Will, neither does every single app being checked manually by a human.
The fact that it is a Bitcoin wallet does mean perhaps that it is being taken less seriously. I'm casting aspersions here, but once bitten, twice shy. If you are downloading a Bitcoin wallet from the Snap Store and you haven't heard the news about what happened last month, then sucks to be you.
Well, this is sort of the thing for me. If there's something that I really care about and I need privacy or security, or I'm doing a financial transaction with it, I make sure that I'm downloading that from a verified publisher, like Signal, for example. I'd never install a Flatpak of that. I go and get the RPM or the DEB directly from Signal and then verify the hash and stuff, because I care about the conversations I have on there being private, and I want to get the thing directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I'd probably do the same with a Bitcoin wallet. Make sure that I'm getting it from a legitimate source and I'm not just opening the Snap Store and installing it.
Well, it's funny that KDE had a similar situation happen recently where someone installed a theme and it wiped their whole machine. And it turns out that anyone can upload KDE themes. And so you can just install them from the desktop. And I don't know if this was malicious or incompetent, but either way, you have to be careful with non-curated or poorly curated stores or repositories. Seems to be the message here.
In the KDE case, I'm really surprised there was no kind of sandboxing around the theme code. I haven't looked at it for years, but it's still surprising. I suppose a global theme needs to have access to everything, but it's still, I mean, it ran rm-rf, which I suppose can be a legitimate way of deleting things, but it just shouldn't be allowed in scripts you can download from the internet.
Well, it's almost as if we should have some sort of repository system with people who maintain those repositories and take responsibility for them.
Well, like a bunch of trusted individuals who care about the platform more than anything else and will really put the effort and care that's needed in.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We should definitely do that. But again, that's not really scalable, is it, to all the new shit that people want and the new versions of everything that they want?
Yeah, I think it's really tricky, isn't it, when things like web browsers are almost releasing on a daily basis now. You couldn't realistically have someone building and packaging a complex application like that every day. And I think it's only getting worse with the more applications people want, the bigger the problem becomes. There must be a way that fixes this, that isn't let anyone upload a random binary to a store that executes on my machine.
Well, supposedly sandboxing and everything, but that doesn't help if it's a Bitcoin wallet.
Well, yeah, it only helps you within that sandbox, right? With these Bitcoin wallets, they were sending stuff out via the network. Say, okay, it can't grab a load of files from your machine, but if you put something into it and it's got network access, it basically does what it wants.
I also think this is a much bigger problem. I mean, the fact that it's on the Snap store is bad enough, but just this week, my mother has actually been asking me about emails she's been getting from Santander, the bank, who's launching a new app for their banking. And it just made me realize that these emails from Santander, supposedly from Santander, they actually come from a domain called My Santander, which is exactly the kind of tactic a scammer would use. And even the emails from Santander, just picking on them as an example, warning you about fraud come from this spurious domain who you can't check at all. I mean, I could find the link for it, but it's absolutely staggering. Yeah, so I've actually just searched, and it's like, this is the domain from the official Santander email, em1.yoursantander.co.uk. What does that mean? And that's from one of the biggest banks. So the opportunity for people scamming things is huge. I don't know how we cure any of it when not even a bank like Santander can get it right.
Switch off the internet. We're done.
On to a bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to latenightlinux.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed that includes either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And you even get some episodes early. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@latenightlinux.com. Okay, this episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/LNL. Tailscale is an easy-to-deploy, zero-config, no-fuss VPN that allows you to build simple networks across complex infrastructure. It's super simple to set up, and you can have machines and devices all over the world connected to each other as if they're on the same LAN in minutes. Tailscale is WireGuard on easy mode, and that's why loads of Late Night Linux family hosts are Tailscale users. Amalith from Linux Dev Time uses Tailscale for his 3D printers, all his servers, and his home automation. And Gary from Linux After Dark and I both send our offsite backups to our parents' houses using Tailscale. So support the show and check out Tailscale for yourself. Go to tailscale.com/LNL and try Tailscale out for free for up to 100 devices and 3 users with no credit card required. That's tailscale.com/LNL. Let's talk about Mozilla again. And this time it starts with OneRep. So Brian Krebs wrote an expose about OneRep, which is a data privacy company where they supposedly delete your data from the various sites that collect it and sell it and whatnot. And it turns out that the fellow who runs that also has got at least financial interests in, shall we say, data collection companies. So he's got a conflict of interest at the very least. And this wouldn't be much of a story, except that Mozilla Monitor Plus was just a rebadged version of OneRep. And so Mozilla, who just a few weeks ago was touting this as this great service that they were offering, has now decided, well, actually, we probably shouldn't be doing business with them. And now Mozilla look like a bunch of fucking idiots, quite frankly, who don't know how to do due diligence. Am I being overly harsh on Mozilla by saying that?
Well, it does seem like all of this data was publicly available, and a little bit of due diligence and open source intelligence would have helped them find this out. And I think, like, if you're Mozilla and you're launching a service that is doing something like this, you ought to be doing the same due diligence that Brian Krebs has done.
I think you're being very generous there, Gary. I think they did do the due diligence and they knew what they were doing.
You think? I don't know about that. I don't think that they knew the extent of it. I mean, surely not.
I wouldn't be surprised if in the rush for money, which is what they're doing, like look at any idea they can possibly find. Yeah, do that one. Yeah, do that one. That they didn't spend enough time looking into it. I'd like to think that it was a mistake rather than actual disinterest in the problem. But it keeps happening. And so next week, I'm pretty sure that you'll have to buy Tupperware or something from Mozilla just to try and bring a few quid in.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks now, doesn't it? It just feels like every week there's some new thing from Mozilla that distracts from the core mission that the community feel like Mozilla should be focusing on, which is build a decent browser.
Yeah, well, this week it's introducing Did This, a new app for hobbyists.
I thought this was a joke, and I had to check the date when you put it in the Google Doc list.
Yeah, it's not quite April yet. We want to be nice to Mozilla. We want to say good things about them, but they just make it too hard, man, when they keep just doing ridiculous shit.
I mean, this thing it feels like a joke. I've never wanted to install an app that is photos of my hobbies. And if I wanted to do that, there are already apps that people use that do this. If I want to put a photo of my knitting somewhere, I'd put it on Instagram or something so my friends could see it because they're already there. I'm not bothered about installing yet another social media app to add to the 10 that already exists that people use.
But this isn't social media. That's the point. It's like your own private curation that you can share with select people.
You mean like social media is?
Well, yeah, I suppose. It's like having a private Instagram that no one follows you on.
Yeah, that seems really worthwhile.
I've read this blog on the Mozilla page and I've read the didthis.app page. I still don't understand what it's for.
You take photos and make notes about your hobby. So you might, for example, take photos of all your ThinkPads and put the specs in there, and then you can refer back to it or you can share it with your friends.
Okay.
I'm very quiet because my parents said if I didn't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Well, all we can hope is that Mozilla stops doing this nonsense, and it's a big ship to turn around, and hopefully they're going to do it, but I'm starting to lose hope, man. With that new CEO, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd sort their shit out, but it's not looking good so far.
Out of the frying pan into the exact same frying pan.
I thought you were going to say all we can hope for is a hostile takeover of Mozilla.
Well, yeah. Or a fork of Firefox that has got serious people behind it. I know there are various forks of Firefox and some of them are quite popular or whatever, but none of them have the might of Mozilla and all the developers behind it. It would take a billionaire, I think, to do it. You know, it'd take a Shuttleworth type.
Or it might take, I'm just throwing ideas out there, but presumably, Firefox is a great browser. The people working on Firefox know that and maybe are frustrated by other aspects of the foundation. They could fork Firefox. They know what they're doing. They're also responsible for nearly all of the revenue stream.
Yeah, but who's going to pay them?
Well, I mean, they just have to freewheel for a little bit until their fork of Firefox starts winning.
I think they might be waiting a long time given Firefox's shit market share.
Yeah, but it still gets that proportion of Google's guilt money, doesn't it?
Yeah, but if you split that in half, I don't know. I think it would take something very special to succeed as the sort of LibreOffice to Firefox's OpenOffice. And I think that something special is lots of money. I just can't see all the Mozilla developers just taking that risk. I mean, why would they? They've got a sweet job that pays them shitloads. working on Firefox.
Yeah, they'd have to care about the browser.
Yeah, they'd have to care about it more than making a living.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't seem very likely to me.
I don't know. Some people are that naive. They quit their jobs, fork the thing that they love to try and make it work.
Maybe, but then you'd have to do a deal with Google, and I don't think that they'd be keen somehow. Maybe they would. It depends how many people. They'd have to all get together and just leave at the same time and fork it. It just seems like a dream to me. I think it's just going to slowly wither instead. But maybe it'll just wither to the point where they just all wake up one day and say, no, we have to do this. But that feels quite a long way off still.
You're right, Joe.
Sorry, I should be more positive. Yes, they're going to all do this. It's going to be great. Canonical expands long-term support to 12 years, starting with Ubuntu 14.04 LTS. So 14.04 is about to go out of support even if you've got Ubuntu Pro, but now they've got this add-on that you can buy another 2 years of support. It's interesting that there's nothing about pricing, or at least I couldn't find anything about pricing. I think it's a case of if you have to ask, you can't afford it. But they're committing to do this for all the LTSs if you pay up.
What this tells me is that there's a lot of 14.04 servers out there in the world that the people who are operating them have no intention of upgrading. This is a significant undertaking for the security team and all of the various server teams and, assuming that the desktop gets bundled in there as well. There's a lot of work that goes into adding that extra 2 years, and that costs a lot of money. So there must be people who are willing to pay for it for them to bother producing a product like this. So I think this speaks of, one, the slowness of the industry as a whole to upgrade their servers, which is understandable, but also the success of Ubuntu. Like 14.04 is 10 years old now, and people are still using it in production. So I think that's pretty good going.
I think it also explains the focus on snaps, because if you have a lot of your applications, especially the more complicated ones, in snap form, then that surely makes it much easier to support these old releases, especially with desktop stuff like Firefox.
Yeah, I feel like if you're not having to backport Firefox and all of the dependencies and SSL libraries and everything else that go with it to a 10-year-old distro, that goes a long way, doesn't it, in order to ease the burden of maintaining that stuff. I still think that there must be a huge, huge number of these things out there, like you said, Will, for Canonical to consider doing it for another 2 years. Either that or there's some kind of government contract or something where, like in the Windows XP days, it only took 1 or 2 governments for Microsoft to say, get out your checkbooks, we'll keep going to get this stuff moving. But I just feel like we must be getting to a point where there is less and less excuse to upgrade these things. People are using infrastructure as code and orchestration tools to build these things.
Not the kind of people who are running 14.04, Gary, come on.
Well, maybe not the kind of people who are running 14.04, but there are still people who want to pay for extended support for like old versions of Postgres and stuff in the cloud, I suppose. So maybe I'm being a little bit too optimistic, but it just doesn't feel like things are getting any better in terms of people moving forward, does it?
Well, I saw chatter in the community recently when PPAs just went down, just the whole PPA infrastructure went down. And that showed how many old versions of like PHP and various other stuff people were running in production. It turns out that there's a lot of shonky infrastructure out there, and Canonical seem to think they can cash in on it. And good luck to them, I suppose.
Is it wrong that all I can think of is that 12 years ago I was in my 30s, and in 12 years I'll be in my 60s? I mean, what the fuck?
And you still won't have upgraded that machine that you've got running there.
What is it, CentOS 5 or 6 or something?
It's 6.2. That was strong release. I'm sure there's going to be CentOS in 12 years' time.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Kolide. When you go through airport security, there's one line where the TSA agent checks your ID, and another where a machine scans your bag. The same thing happens in enterprise security, but instead of passengers and luggage, it's end users and their devices. These days, most companies are pretty good at the first part of the equation, where they check user identity, but user devices can roll right through authentication without getting inspected at all. In fact, a huge percentage of companies allow unmanaged, untrusted devices to access their data. That means an employee can log in from a laptop that has its firewall turned off and hasn't been updated in 6 months. Or worse, that laptop might belong to a bad actor using employee credentials. Kolide finally solves the device trust problem. Kolide ensures that no device can log into your Okta-protected apps unless it passes your security checks. Plus, you can use Kolide on devices without MDM, like your Linux fleet, contractor devices, and every BYOD phone and laptop in your company. So support the show and go to kolide.com/late-night-linux to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/late-night-linux. Switch emulator Suyu hit by GitLab DMCA. Project lives on through self-hosting. So we talked about the Nintendo Switch emulator Yuzu and how Nintendo shut that shit down. And Suyu was the fork of it, and they were going to try and not make any money from it and be a bit more careful with the encryption keys and stuff. But seemingly no, Nintendo is going to play whack-a-mole here. But what this shows is open source will always win, because you can't just get rid of all that source code. Someone's going to host it somewhere, and yeah, you can chase them around the internet all you want. It's going to live on. It might not be as successful, but someone will still be using it.
Yeah, obviously I completely agree. It's such a cool emulator that does so much already. Even if it doesn't get any further development, it's going to be around for a long time and people will find a way of hosting it. It does seem to be a step up in Nintendo's kind of chasing of these projects, which to me, it probably signifies a new console is on the way rather than anything else. I should make that prediction. But it's worrying. It doesn't seem like GitLab gave up much of a fight, considering this isn't, presumably didn't have all of the same Patreon support that Yuzu did, and had gone out of its way to kind of distance itself from the way of running the project. So it is worrying in terms of the world of emulation in general, but yes, I think give it 6 months, there'll be other forks.
Well, we did get a few people pushing back on our coverage of this last time. Matt wrote to us, while I agree with you that Nintendo is a shower of bastards, the issue with Yuzu is a little bit more complicated than at first glance. Yuzu being an emulator or running a Patreon wasn't the issue. The outright touting that they had broken the Switch's encryption and providing the key files to their Discord users were the things that got them in trouble. And Matt goes on to say that it looks like Nintendo's legal team gathered loads of evidence, and then during the discovery phase, the Yuzu folk realized that, yeah, they didn't have a fucking leg to stand on and they were just going to lose. So that's why they just gave up.
Yeah. Actually, I was really grateful for Matt's perspective because I haven't been that close to the project. It does sound flying very close to the sun in terms of, it's not what I think of it as the spirit of emulation, but I can see how it kind of got that far. Interestingly, things are probably going to get even more difficult for Nintendo because I think I read about a copy circumvention card and ROM saving tool that's about to come out. So, I don't see how they can win by fighting emulators or even, securing their software. They've done well for the Switch.
It's a real shame that Phelan isn't here because Matt also said, P.S. Plasma 6 is cool. I just wish Discover and KDE Neon would stop crashing.
Oh, actually, you're right. You reminded me. I was away last week in Italy and I used K-Itinerary for the first time. It's actually really good. It's really good.
Oh, Phelan's going to listen to this and just be gutted that he's not here.
Thanks, Phelan. Thanks for K-Itinerary.
Redis tightens its license terms, pleasing basically no one. So I think we all saw this coming. It was a good few years ago that they made some of their modules not properly open source. And now they've moved the whole thing to be not properly open source. It is source available, but it's not properly open source. And the various licenses that they use are not ideal. And predictably, there's been various forks of it. There's Redict, I think you said that, or Redict, which was Drew DeVault's one. And then there's a few other ones, including Apache KV Rocks. The register describes Redis as the most popular database in the world, if that is, your world is solely within AWS. So, Gary, that's cloud stuff. You know about that. Is it really popular, Redis?
Yeah, Redis and the various cloud vendor services that are built on top of it are pretty popular. Like a lot of applications have need for in-memory database and things like that Redis offers. So, yeah, I would say a good proportion of modern web applications are using it.
Right, and you hinted at it there, the problem that the cloud providers have made their own versions of it, and that's what Redis Labs, the company behind Redis, didn't like.
Well, the problem is that I feel like there is a proven track record at this point that the cloud providers will just fork it and maintain it themselves. So I'm not entirely sure what Redis hope to get out of this. I mean, unless they're going to be massively successful with their own SaaS-hosted version of it. But I think history tells us that that's often not the case either.
Is it just a fuck you to the likes of AWS? Like, you maintain it then? Good luck.
I mean, it could be. Ultimately, with these things, I feel like whatever becomes the most popular thing ultimately wins, and the rest of it just ends up losing out. And I can't help but think in this case that if people are already using Elasticache, which is Amazon's version of this, then they're probably just going to continue using Elasticache. I can't see them going, we'll move to the Redis hosted version or run our own Redis cluster.
There seem to be two overarching themes to our podcast, one of which is how Mozilla suck, and the other one is how the hell do you make money from open source software? This is very firmly in that camp. It's a shame that, yet again, a successful open source product is, let's say, choosing to go down the less open route in order to try and stay alive financially. And in this case, it's perhaps too little too late. If they'd have done something 2-3 years ago, probably the same. But we would have had a conversation then saying, why are they doing this? It's ridiculous. Well, I think they kind of signed their death warrant here, and they probably won't be around in a couple of years' time. And it's a shame because the people who have benefited from that work, specifically AWS in this case, will be around. And it's a bit sad, and I still haven't solved this problem. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it again in a couple of weeks with a different project.
At risk of getting into really boring license talk, surely if they had used the GPL or the AGPL in the first place, this wouldn't have been a problem. But then maybe it wouldn't have become so successful. If you have a permissively licensed project, then people are going to take the piss with it, aren't they?
Well, are they taking the piss, or are they just doing exactly what the license you chose them asked them to do?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not taking the piss, you're right, yeah.
And I think this is part of the problem, is that permissively licensed software in an ideal world is great, right? Like, it's really nice to be able to do what you want with it. But equally, that means that the quote-unquote bad guys in this situation are always going to do what the hell they want with it. And I'm not entirely sure that the GPL solves that, because the GPL still doesn't stop you from making money from the product.
Yeah, but the AGPL means that you have to use it as is, and if you make any changes, you've got to contribute them back.
But in this case, a lot of the cloud providers are contributing the changes back upstream as well. It's just that their revenue model means that they're a lot more successful at making money from the project than perhaps the actual project is. So it's a tricky one. I don't think that it's solved purely through licensing. And maybe it's solved through partnering with the cloud providers and making a hosted version with them rather than allowing them to consume it straight off the bat. I don't know. But there are people a lot more clever than any of us in this room that have thought about this problem. And like Will said, we're still sitting here talking about Redis in the same way that we were talking about Elasticsearch a couple of years ago. And we'll probably be talking about another project in 6 months' time.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Entroware. Go to entroware.com. Entroware sells computers with Ubuntu and Ubuntu Mate pre-installed. They've got a range of desktops, laptops, and servers, and most parts are configurable, so you can pick the CPU, RAM, and storage that's right for you. If you can't find exactly what you want, then do contact them, and they'll work with you on a bespoke solution that's perfect for your needs. They ship to the UK, Republic of Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And if you do buy one of their machines, there's a little drop down at checkout, and you can select Late Night Linux so they'll know that we sent you. So go to entroware.com for all your Linux computing needs. Meta connects Threads to the Fediverse. So Threads was Facebook's Twitter ripoff, essentially, or Meta, sorry. And it has somewhat joined the Fediverse in that you can see posts from Threads from a Mastodon client, for example, but it's opt-in and very much in beta. And I suppose more importantly, there's quite a backlash to this, and a lot of people saying we don't want them here. And we're going to block them and defederate threads.
I don't use threads. I've never looked at it. I don't really care about it. But if I was using it, I would not expect this feature to exist for very long, because as soon as their user base starts ramping up, I'm sure they'll shut it down to close that wall around their garden yet again.
Well, except that they're making noises that they don't want it to be a walled garden.
Well, I'm convinced.
Yeah, I am as well.
I mean, I've never used threads much like you will, but I don't know what content is on threads that people are hugely objecting to seeing in the Fediverse. I feel like all of the people who wanted to post the kind of content you see on Twitter stayed on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. And the people who didn't want to see that moved to Mastodon in our communities. And in the non-tech communities, a lot of them moved to threads, mainly because they got tricked to signing up when they opened Instagram. So I don't know, if they want to federate, so be it. I just won't look at the content. I'm not really that bothered either way about it. Like, it's an open ecosystem. If they want to federate, they can federate.
That's kind of how I feel about it. I mean, Fedi-Tips is a fairly big account on the Fediverse, and the person running that has urged admins to defederate threads, making the point that Meta's moderation practices are really, really bad, which is a fairly good point, but you as an individual user can just block the entire domain, the entire instance effectively. And you as an admin, say the admins of Fostodon, they could decide, well, we want to defederate. And then if I don't like that, I could move to a different instance that hasn't defederated.
To me, that's sort of the point of this federated ecosystem we find ourselves in, isn't it? Is that ultimately the control is down to the admin of the server, or you, or both if you're running your own server.
Yeah, everybody's admin now. So it seems a bit weird to complain about it and be up in arms. It just seems like a weird thing to get angry about when you can just block it. I mean, yeah, Meta is a shit company and fuck those guys, but it's open. It's an open protocol. What do you expect? Will, you submitted this via your bot to the spreadsheet, and I thought it was too funny to not include World Server Throwing Championships 2024.
Yeah, sadly we missed it. It was a couple of weeks ago at the CloudFest conference in Germany. But the good news is that CloudFest 2025 is now a year away. And so you have opportunity to get in training to enter the World Server Throwing Championships. And there are a couple of categories. There's the 1U category, the 2U category, the 4U category, and even an 8U category for the really big people. So get in training and see how far you can fling a server.
Can we sponsor Phalim? It might be our only chance for sponsoring Phalim to get a server in the cloud.
I mean, I assumed this was just 1U. How are you going to throw an 8U server any sort of distance?
Well, I once pulled a 2U server out of a rack and dropped it on my toe, and I can tell you that wasn't a fun time. So I feel like maybe I'll take the little half-depth 1U Power Edge box and throw that. That's probably about the limit there.
Well, on that cheerful note, we should probably get out of here. We'll be back next week with hopefully Voice of the Masses and maybe some discoveries. And Phelan probably won't be better by then, given that we're going to record it in about 5 minutes. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Graham.
I've been Will.
And I've been Gary.
See you later.